Salutations, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. Here I am in London, the Twickenham area, and I'm in front of the house where Henry Labouchere spent right at the end of the 19th century into the year 1903. So Labouchere was a household name in late 19th century Britain. He was a renowned journalist, campaigner who was a Liberal Member of Parliament in two separate stints for two different constituencies. So he's born in London in 1831. His grandparents had moved to this country from France in 1816, so just after the end of the Napoleonic Wars. Obviously, had they moved during the Napoleonic Wars, they would have been interned, and they were Protestants. So I'm not sure that's why they moved or not. I suppose discrimination against Protestants was coming back, being abolished at the time of the Revolution, and lots of Huguenots had moved to this country and indeed to Ireland in 1685. So it was odd to be coming at that time. But anyway, they prospered. They were very wealthy by the same time Henry Labouchere was born, and indeed he was not Henri, he was Henry. So, but he was British on one side, but didn't appear to identify with France, so he visited it on many occasions. So he went to Eton and he went to Cambridge University. He was suspected of cheating in his exams, so he went down without a degree. But the thing is, I would have thought suspected isn't good enough. You actually have to prove it. But there we are. But of course, he didn't need a degree. Hardly anybody had a degree. Only about 1% of people went to university at all, whether they graduated or not. And actually leaving university without a degree was not unusual, was not considered any disgrace, just didn't bother to graduate. And back then it was little more than a finishing school for well-got youngsters. So yeah, he made a name for himself as a journalist. He did a fine line in anti-Semitic bile. I'm not sure where the anti-Semitism came from. It wasn't such a big thing in this country, I didn't think. And he joined the Liberal Party, which might seem incongruous these days, as Liberals are zealously anti-racist, and that's obviously laudable. Yeah, he was in Parliament in the 1860s, same time as Charles Bradlaugh, who also sat for Northampton. In those days, quite a lot of constituencies with a high population were double-seater. They were represented simultaneously by two members of Parliament. Bradlaugh was also a Liberal, and Bradlaugh was known for being an atheist, which back then was regarded as utterly scandalous. He was open about disbelieving in God, and didn't want to swear on the Bible and so on, so it caused a great hoo-ha at the time. It really stretched the limits of tolerance, got the Liberal Party a bit of a bad name. People just didn't think it could be moral if you disbelieved in the divine. Quite which divinity was another matter. The United Kingdom is becoming a bit more broad-minded on that one. You could be Hindu, you could be Jewish and Muslim and so on, and get into Parliament by that stage. Having said that, there were a few Jewish people, there were no people of other religions till a bit later, to the 1890s, so they were allowed, just didn't happen to be elected. Anyway, so Labouchere, he was out of Parliament for a while. He went to Paris in 1870, the siege of Paris ended in 1871, wrote his diary about it, which was scabrous in his trademark style, seemed to find mirth in well nigh anything, even though it was a ghastly situation, with people being shot every day by snipers, with a sort of civil war going on inside Paris, people on starvation rations. Not quite sure how he survived or was allowed out. Maybe because he was a British subject, he was permitted to leave. So that was that. But he believed that homosexuality was becoming rife in the United Kingdom, and he noticed that there were some notorious gay watering holes as he saw it. So there was a piece of legislation was completely unrelated to sexuality, in which he inserted an amendment, about inserting things in certain places, the Labouchere Amendment, as in his name was given to it, insisted it would only be allowed through the House of Commons if this amendment went through, and it was voted for by a huge majority. Because until 1861, certainly sodomy was punishable by death, and that was obviously rectal sex between males. I'm not sure if it was actually prohibited between females. I've heard that it was. So that was gone. But it would remain punishable by life imprisonment, but not by death. Bear in mind, even to this day, is a capital offence in a number of countries, like Saudi Arabia, of which Donald Trump is so very fond. But the Labouchere Amendment said that any physical intimacy between two males was a crime and punishable by up to 2 years hard labour. Although on a world scale that was very mild at the time. Napoleonic countries had completely abolished this under the Napoleonic Code. That was France, Italy largely adopted the Napoleonic Code and so forth. Now, when Napoleon was having these jurists write the Napoleonic Code, did he simply forget to include the prohibition on same-sex relations, or was it a willful exclusion? He may have left it out because his brother Louis was well known to be a Ganymede. So that piece of legislation remained on the statute book, the Labouchere Amendment, until 1967. So it didn't actually define what was gross indecency between two men, but it was broadly understood that any sexual act between the two males was a crime, up to 2 years hard labour. By the 1960s, they tended to be getting milder sentences of just a few weeks, a fine, a suspended sentence, some estrogen treatment, which is supposed to prevent this sort of behaviour. But people say that really that was chemical castration, and that's what Alan Turing was sentenced to. So that was him, and he had a very mordant wit and wrote this biting pastiche of The White Man's Burden by Rudyard Kipling, because The White Man's Burden, is not widely realised, was written about what the Americans were doing, not what the British were doing, when the United States started to conquer the Philippines. So they'd helped this Filipino nationalist insurrection against Spanish colonial rule, and the Filipinos thought they were getting independence. Well, no sooner had they cast off the Iberian yoke than they had a Yankee one placed on their shoulders. And William Howard Taft told his generals to civilize and Christianize the Philippines, not realizing the Philippines had been Christian long before the United States had existed, 90% Christian. So anyway, there was this civil war, well, not civil war, there's this war in which hundreds of thousands of Filipinos were killed fighting for their independence against a country which was so proud to have fought for its independence from another European country. But Rudyard Kipling thought this was entirely laudable and wrote this paean to American imperialism. So then Labouchere couldn't resist parodying it, The Brown Man's Burden, which is really a scathing send-up of colonialism, saying how the brown man is much put upon by the whites and deprived of liberty, and isn't it bizarre that he shouldn't think this is a wonderful state of affairs to be ruled by another race, which is completely out of sympathy for him, with him and so forth. Alright, so that's enough about Henry Labouchere, the Labouchere Amendment. As you can see, he was not short of pennies. This commodious house here in Twickenham on Cross Deep, that's the street, hard by where Alexander Pope used to live. Unfortunately, his house has long since been demolished. Beyond that White House is the garden which he created, right beside the River Thames. So Labouchere, he died in 1912. It's now a school, this building. So please follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and thank you so much for your most generous support on PayPal and Patreon. It's warmly appreciated. So please book me for lessons in English, history, English as a foreign language, religious studies, geography, politics, things like that of that nature for common entrance or 11+, GCSE, A-level, international baccalaureate, university entrance, law, I do that as well, French. I edit documents, I help people with dissertations, theses, coursework, essays, interview preparation, and their CV, and I'm a tour guide in London. So get in contact. Thank you so much. Goodbye.